Anthony and I met when I was 28, and he was 30. My name's Brenda, and I'm 34 now, living in Tennessee. We met at a little diner that I used to stop by after my shifts as a receptionist at a dentist's office. He worked as a mechanic at a local shop. The first time we talked, I thought he had this quiet confidence about him, something I wasn't used to. Most guys I had dated before were all talk, but Anthony? He didn't try too hard. He wasn't flashy or showy. He was just steady. I liked that at first. We started dating pretty quickly, and things were good. No, actually, they were great. He didn't mind that I was still figuring things out financially. He didn't judge me for having a couple of credit cards that were maxed out or for occasionally borrowing money from my mom when rent was tight. He didn't have much either, but what he had, he worked for. I respected that, even if I didn't fully understand it. Our dates weren't extravagant. We'd grab pizza or sit in his truck and talk for hours. He had this way of making me feel grounded, and I think I really needed that back then. Life always felt like a mess. Late bill payments, roommates who bailed on rent, and me barely keeping my head above water. But Anthony? He was like this calm in the storm. I thought I hit the jackpot. When we moved in together a year later, things felt like they were falling into place. We found a little apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. He worked long hours at the shop, and I stuck with the receptionist gig. We weren't rolling in money, but we made it work. He had this whole save first, spend later mentality, and it balanced out my treat yourself mindset, at least at first. I remember the first real fight we had. It was over groceries. I wanted to grab name brand stuff, the kind I grew up with, and he didn't see the point in spending the extra money. Why pay more for the same thing? He'd ask. It wasn't a big deal back then. We laughed it off, and I started sneaking in little splurges here and there. I figured it wasn't a problem if I didn't make it one. Our differences started to show in other ways too. I liked going out, meeting friends for drinks, or hitting the occasional concert. Anthony was more of a homebody. He'd rather stay in, fix something around the apartment, or watch a game on TV. At first, I didn't mind. It was kind of cute, actually, how content he was with the simple things. But over time, I started to feel like I was missing out. Still, I convinced myself that what we had was special. He wasn't flashy, but he was dependable. He wasn't romantic in a sweep you off your feet kind of way, but he showed up for me. I knew guys who would blow their paycheck on a weekend out while their girlfriends covered the rent. That wasn't Anthony. He'd stash away extra cash for emergencies or talk about saving for a house someday. I should have appreciated that more, but part of me was frustrated. I wanted more out of life. Nice vacations, cute outfits, and a lifestyle that didn't feel so basic. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. We'll get there eventually, I thought. But looking back, I think I was already starting to resent how practical he was. It made me feel like I was the irresponsible one, even though I didn't see it that way at the time. When we got engaged, I was over the moon. He didn't have some big, dramatic proposal. It was just us, sitting on the couch one night, and he handed me a ring he'd saved up for. I could tell he'd put a lot of thought into it, and that meant something. But deep down, I couldn't help wishing it had been a little more special. I didn't say that out loud, of course. I didn't want to sound ungrateful, but I posted a picture of the ring on Instagram with a caption that made it seem more romantic than it was. "Forever starts now," I wrote. My friends ate it up, and I loved the attention. We had a small wedding, just family and close friends. Anthony didn't see the point in spending a ton of money on one day when we could use it to start our life together. I went along with it because, honestly, I didn't have the money to go all out anyway. But when I saw my friends posting pictures of their extravagant weddings on Facebook, I felt a little pang of envy. Maybe for our anniversary, I told myself. We'll do something bigger down the road. The first couple of years of marriage were good, for the most part. We settled into a routine, and it felt comfortable. But as time went on, I started to notice things that bugged me. Anthony wasn't the kind of guy who planned surprises or got overly sentimental. He didn't gush over me or post about me on social media like some of my friends' husbands did. I knew he loved me. He showed it in his own way. But sometimes I wanted more. I wanted the grand gestures, the Instagram-worthy moments. Money became a bigger issue too. I had never been great at managing it, but I figured we'd find a balance. Instead, we argued about it more and more. He wanted to stick to a strict budget, and I hated feeling like I had to ask permission to spend money. If I bought a new dress or treated myself to a latte, he'd give me that look. He wouldn't say anything outright, but I could tell he thought it was wasteful. It made me feel small, like I wasn't capable of making decisions on my own. At the same time, I started to notice the little ways he'd cut corners to save money, fixing things instead of replacing them, using coupons or waiting for sales. It wasn't a bad thing, but it made me feel like we'd never get ahead. I'd scroll through Instagram and see people I went to high school with, traveling, buying houses, or living these picture-perfect lives. I couldn't help but wonder why that couldn't be us. Looking back, I think this was the start of the tension that would eventually break us. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. I just thought we were going through a rough patch, like every couple does. I told myself it was normal, that we'd figure it out. And honestly, I was too busy comparing us to everyone else to really pay attention to the cracks that were forming right in front of me. As the months went by, I started to feel more restless. Anthony and I weren't fighting all the time or anything, but the vibe between us started to change. I don't even think he noticed it at first because he was so focused on work and sticking to our budget, but I felt it. The excitement we had in the beginning just wasn't there anymore. Our nights together used to feel cozy and special, but now they felt predictable, like we were stuck in this boring loop. And honestly, I was starting to feel trapped. It wasn't just about Anthony, it was about me too. I didn't like what my life had turned into. I'd see other women on Instagram, wearing cute outfits, out at brunch with their friends, or posting pictures of their new kitchen renovations. Meanwhile, I was here, in our tiny apartment, eating leftovers for dinner and wearing the same leggings I'd had for years. I started spending more time scrolling through social media because it felt like an escape. But the more I scrolled, the more it made me feel like I was falling behind. Anthony didn't really get it. He wasn't on social media much, and when I'd show him pictures of my old high school friends buying houses or taking trips to Cancun, he'd just shrug. Good for them, he'd say, like it didn't bother him at all. I couldn't understand that. How could he be so okay with settling for less? Our conversations about money started to get more tense. I tried to explain how I felt, but Anthony would always come back to the same thing. We have to live within our means. It wasn't that I wanted to blow all our money, but sometimes I just wanted to feel like I could enjoy life a little. Was that so wrong? Things really started to shift when I got a credit card without telling him. I know it wasn't the smartest decision, but I felt like I needed some breathing room. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I'd just use it for little things, like clothes or going out with friends. But it quickly spiraled. Before I knew it, I was using it to cover things we couldn't afford, like takeout or gifts for birthdays. I justified it by telling myself that Anthony was too uptight about money and that I deserved to treat myself every once in a while. Of course, I couldn't keep it a secret forever. One night, Anthony found the statement while he was cleaning out the desk drawer. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw the balance. He didn't yell or anything, he wasn't that kind of guy, but the disappointment in his voice hit harder than any screaming match could have. Brenda, why didn't you tell me about this? He asked, holding up the paper like it was proof of a crime I'd committed. I felt defensive immediately. I didn't think it was a big deal, I said, crossing my arms. It's not like I used it to gamble or something. It is a big deal, he said quietly, his voice tight. We can barely cover our bills as it is. How are we supposed to pay this off? I could feel my face getting hot. I hated that he was making me feel like a child who got caught sneaking candy. Maybe if we had a little more money, this wouldn't even be an issue, I snapped. I wouldn't have to use a credit card if we weren't scraping by all the time. Anthony's face went blank. That's the thing about him. He didn't yell or slam doors or storm off. He just got quiet. We're scraping by because I'm working my butt off to make sure we have what we need, he said. This isn't just on me, Brenda. We're supposed to be in this together. I didn't have a response to that, so I walked away. I knew I'd messed up, but instead of owning up to it, I doubled down. In my head, I started justifying everything. He's the one who's too cheap, I told myself. If he'd just loosen up a little, I wouldn't feel so frustrated all the time. From that point on, there was this tension between us that we couldn't shake. We still went through the motions, cooking dinner, watching TV, talking about our day, but it all felt forced. I started spending more time out of the house, meeting up with friends, or going shopping. I told Anthony it was just to get some fresh air, but really, I was avoiding him. I didn't want to have another conversation about money or hear another lecture about saving for the future. The resentment between us started to grow. He'd make little comments about my spending, and I'd fire back with jabs about how we were always broke. It wasn't just about the credit card anymore. It was about everything. I felt like he was holding me back, like I could never be the person I wanted to be because I was stuck living this small, boring life with him. One night, I was scrolling through Facebook and saw that one of my old friends from college had just gotten engaged. Her fiancé had proposed on a beach in Hawaii, and the pictures were straight out of a magazine. I felt this wave of jealousy that I couldn't shake. I started thinking about how different my life could have been if I'd married someone else, someone who could afford to give me the kind of life I wanted. I didn't say any of this out loud, of course, but the thoughts were there, creeping in and planting little seeds of doubt in my mind. Every time Anthony and I had a disagreement, those thoughts would come rushing back. I deserve better than this, I'd think to myself, even though I didn't really know what better looked like. The frustration I felt toward Anthony started to take on a life of its own. I was annoyed with him all the time, sometimes for things he did, but mostly for things he didn't do. He didn't surprise me with flowers or plan cute date nights. He didn't post about me on Facebook, even when I posted pictures of us with captions like, "My rock." He didn't seem to care about keeping up with everyone else the way I did. It was like he was perfectly fine living this boring, mediocre life, and that drove me crazy. But instead of telling him how I felt in a way that might actually fix things, I let it simmer. I found myself nitpicking everything he did. If he came home and plopped on the couch after work, I'd roll my eyes and think, of course he's too tired to do anything fun. If he reminded me to stick to the budget, I'd snap back with something like, maybe if you made more money, we wouldn't need a budget. I knew I was being unfair, but in the moment, it felt good to let out all the frustration I'd been holding in. I started spending more time out of the house. I'd meet up with my girlfriends at this little coffee shop downtown, where we'd sit for hours talking about everything and nothing. I didn't tell them much about what was going on with Anthony, but I made little comments here and there. He just doesn't get it, I'd say, shaking my head as I sipped my overpriced latte. My friends would nod sympathetically, and I'd feel this rush of validation, like I wasn't the problem. The truth is, I was starting to feel like I had nothing in common with Anthony anymore. He was always so focused on being responsible and saving for the future, while I wanted to enjoy life in the present. I didn't see why we couldn't have both, but every time I brought it up, he'd give me that same old speech about how we couldn't afford to live like other people because we had to be realistic. I hated that word. Realistic felt like code for boring and miserable. I'll admit, I didn't handle my frustration in the healthiest way. I started venting about Anthony to people who had no business knowing the details of our relationship. My best friend, Lauren, heard most of it. She's the kind of person who always tells you what you want to hear, and I loved her for that. Whenever I complained about Anthony, she'd back me up 100%. You deserve to be happy, she'd say. You shouldn't have to settle. Those words stuck with me, even when I knew they weren't helpful. One night, Lauren and I went out for drinks, and she introduced me to some of her coworkers. One of them, this guy named Jake, was the kind of person who instantly made you feel special. He wasn't exactly handsome, but he had this charisma about him, always cracking jokes and making everyone laugh. He flirted with me a little, and I have to admit, I liked the attention. It was harmless, I told myself, just a little fun to take my mind off things. But that night stuck with me. I found myself thinking about Jake more than I should have, replaying the way he made me feel. It wasn't that I wanted to cheat on Anthony. at least not physically. But emotionally, I was already halfway there. I started messaging Jake on Instagram, just casual stuff at first. "Hey, that joke you told the other night was hilarious," I'd write, and he'd respond with something just flirty enough to keep me hooked. Meanwhile, things with Anthony were getting worse. He wasn't blind to the fact that I was pulling away, and it was starting to take a toll on him. I'd catch him looking at me with this mix of confusion and hurt, like he couldn't figure out what he'd done wrong. He'd try to bring me back in little ways, offering to cook dinner or suggesting we watch a movie together. But it always felt forced. I could tell he was trying, but it wasn't enough for me. I didn't want his quiet gestures. I wanted fireworks. One night, we had another fight about money. It started because I'd ordered takeout without telling him, and he saw the charge on the bank statement. "We talked about this, Brenda," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We can't keep spending money we don't have." I snapped. "I'm so sick of this, Anthony. I'm sick of always having to scrape by while everyone else gets to enjoy their lives. Don't you want more for us?" "I do want more," he said, his voice rising for the first time. "That's why I'm trying to save. That's why I'm working my butt off while you're out spending money we don't have." It was like something inside me broke. "Maybe if you weren't so broke, I wouldn't have to do this," I shouted before I could stop myself. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just gone off. I saw the look on his face, shock, hurt, anger, and I knew I'd crossed a line. Anthony didn't say anything. He just stared at me for what felt like forever, then turned and walked out the door. I stood there, my heart racing, waiting for him to come back. But he didn't. He didn't come back that night or the next day. When I called his phone, it went straight to voicemail. For the first time, I started to wonder if I'd pushed him too far. When Anthony didn't come home that night, I told myself he just needed some space. I figured he'd cool off and come back in the morning like nothing had happened. But when the morning came and he still wasn't there, panic started to set in. I called his phone again, straight to voicemail. I texted him a couple of times, trying to sound casual. "Hey, where are you? Are you okay?" No response. By the afternoon, I was spiraling. I wasn't sure if I was more angry or scared. Did he really leave? Over a stupid fight? The silence in the apartment was deafening. I kept expecting him to walk through the door, but every minute that passed without him felt heavier. I called Lauren to vent. "He's overreacting," I said, pacing the living room. "I mean, yeah, I said some stuff, but it's not like I didn't have a point." "What exactly did you say?" she asked. I hesitated. "I might have called him too broke to be a real husband," I admitted. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oof, Brenda, that's a lot." "I didn't mean it," I snapped. I was mad, and it just came out. He knows I didn't mean it? "Does he, though?" Lauren asked carefully. "You've been pretty frustrated with him for a while." That comment stung, but I didn't want to admit she might be right. "Whatever," I said, brushing it off. "He'll be back. He always comes back." Except he didn't. Days turned into a week, and there was no sign of him. I started checking his Instagram and Facebook, looking for clues, but his accounts were as quiet as the apartment. I even drove by his shop one day, hoping to see his truck, but it wasn't there. It was like he'd disappeared. The longer he was gone, the angrier I got. How dare he just walk out like that? Was he trying to punish me? Was he trying to make me grovel? I told myself I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. If he wanted to act like a child, that was on him. But underneath all the anger, there was something else. Something I didn't want to admit. I was scared. What if he didn't come back? What if I'd pushed him too far this time? Without him, things started to fall apart. I'd never realized how much he handled until he wasn't there to handle it anymore. He was the one who kept track of the bills, made sure rent was paid on time, and did the grocery shopping. Suddenly, all of that was on me, and I wasn't ready for it. I started missing payments and racking up late fees. My credit card was maxed out, and I didn't have a clue how I was going to dig myself out of the hole I'd created. I tried to act like everything was fine, but it wasn't. I felt like I was drowning, and there was no one to pull me out. I started avoiding my friends because I didn't want to admit what was really going on. Lauren kept asking me if I'd heard from Anthony, and every time she brought it up, I'd change the subject. I couldn't stand the pity in her voice. One night, after a particularly bad day at work, I broke down. I was sitting on the couch, surrounded by takeout containers and unopened bills, when it hit me. I had no idea how to fix this. I grabbed my phone and called Anthony's number again, even though I knew he wouldn't answer. When it went to voicemail, I left a message, my voice shaking. "Anthony, I don't know where you are, but I need you to come home. Please. I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean it. I don't know how to do this without you." I hung up before I could say anything else, feeling both desperate and ashamed. The days after that voicemail were some of the hardest. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a text or a call, but nothing came. I started to wonder if this was it. If I'd really pushed him so far that he wasn't coming back. The thought made me feel sick. I'd spent so much time resenting him for what he wasn't, and now that he was gone, all I could think about was what he'd been. He wasn't perfect, but he'd been there for me in ways no one else ever had. And I'd taken that for granted. The worst part was that I couldn't even blame him for leaving. As much as I wanted to tell myself he was overreacting, deep down, I knew the truth. I'd hurt him, and I hadn't just hurt him once. I'd chipped away at him little by little, with every snide comment and every passive-aggressive jab. Calling him too broke to be a real husband was just the final blow. Still, admitting I was wrong didn't make it any easier to deal with the fallout. I started to feel like a ghost in my own life, just going through the motions. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and sit in the same spot on the couch, staring at the door like he might walk through it at any moment. But he didn't. It wasn't just the financial stuff that was hard to handle. It was the loneliness. For all the things I'd resented about Anthony, he'd always been there. He was my person, the one I could vent to when I had a bad day or sit with in comfortable silence. Without him, the apartment felt empty in a way I couldn't describe. One night, I got a text from Lauren. "You okay? Haven't heard from you in a while." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Not really." I finally typed, "I think I really screwed up." Lauren showed up at my apartment the next day, uninvited but exactly what I needed. I barely had the energy to get off the couch when she knocked, and when I opened the door, she took one look at me and said, "You look like hell, Brenda." I rolled my eyes, but I knew she was right. My hair was a mess. I was wearing the same sweats I'd had on for 3 days, and I could feel the puffiness in my face from crying on and off all week. She didn't waste time. She walked right in, picked up a pile of unopened mail off the coffee table, and said, "All right, spill. What's going on?" I hated how direct she was sometimes, but in that moment it was a relief. I told her everything. The fight with Anthony, how he walked out, how I hadn't heard from him since. By the time I finished, I was crying again, and Lauren sat next to me, rubbing my back. "I'm not gonna lie, Brenda," she said after a while. "You really messed this one up." "Wow, thanks for the support," I snapped, wiping my nose on my sleeve. "I'm serious," she said, her tone softening. "You can't just say stuff like that and expect it not to hurt. Anthony's a good guy. Yeah, he's not perfect, but who is? You think Jake from Instagram is gonna handle all your bills and fix your sink when it breaks?" I wanted to argue, but I didn't have it in me. She wasn't wrong. For all my complaints about Anthony, he'd always been steady, dependable. I just hadn't realized how much that mattered until he was gone. Lauren stayed for a few hours, helping me sort through the mess of bills and trying to come up with a plan. "You need to start cleaning this up," she said, pointing to the stack of overdue notices. "If he does come back, you don't want him walking into this disaster." The thought of him coming back sent a jolt of hope through me, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. "What if he doesn't?" I asked quietly. Lauren didn't answer right away. "Then you figure it out," she said finally. "But you've got to try, Brenda. If you want him back, you've got to show him you're willing to put in the work." After she left, I thought about what she'd said. Was I willing to put in the work? I wasn't sure. Part of me felt like Anthony should have stayed and fought for us instead of walking out. But another part of me, the part I didn't want to admit was there, knew that I'd been the one to push him away. The next few days were rough. I started picking up overtime shifts at work, partly to distract myself and partly to chip away at the mountain of debt I'd built. It was exhausting, but it gave me something to focus on. I also started reaching out to Anthony's family and friends, trying to find out where he was. Most of them were polite but guarded, clearly not thrilled with me. His sister Sarah was the only one who gave me anything to go on. "He's staying with me for now," she said when I called her. "But Brenda, he doesn't want to talk to you right now. He's really hurt." "Sarah, please," I begged. "I just need to explain." She sighed. "I don't think he's ready to hear it. Maybe give him some time." Time. That was the last thing I wanted to give him. Every day he was gone felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. But I didn't have a choice. All I could do was wait and hope that he'd eventually be ready to hear me out. In the meantime, I tried to keep my head above water. I started cooking at home more, partly to save money, and partly because the sight of all those takeout containers in the trash made me feel like a failure. I deleted the Instagram app off my phone, tired of seeing everyone else's picture-perfect lives. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One night, about 3 weeks after Anthony had left, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through Netflix, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "He wants to talk. Can you come over tomorrow?" My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might jump out of my chest. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was feeling. Relief? Anxiety? Both? The next day, I drove to Sarah's house, my stomach in knots the whole way. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Anthony's truck parked out front. I sat in my car for a minute, trying to calm myself down, before finally getting out and walking to the door. Sarah answered, gave me a small smile, and said, "He's in the backyard." I found him sitting on the patio, a beer in his hand, looking out at the yard. He didn't look up when I walked out, and for a moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to say. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Hey," he glanced at me, then back at the yard. "Hey." I sat down in the chair next to him, the silence stretching out between us. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm sorry, Anthony," I blurted out. "I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you, for all of it. I was wrong." He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Do you even know what you're apologizing for, Brenda? Or are you just saying it because you want me to come back?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I knew I deserved it. "I know what I did," I said, my voice shaking. "I didn't appreciate you. I took you for granted, and I hurt you, and I'm so sorry." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "I don't know if I can just forget what you said," he admitted. "It's not just about the words, Brenda. It's about everything. The way you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like nothing I did was ever good enough for you." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You were enough," I said softly. "I just didn't see it. I was so focused on what I thought I was missing that I didn't appreciate what I had. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want to fix this, Anthony. I want to fix us." He didn't respond right away, and the silence felt unbearable. Finally, he sighed and said, "I don't know, Brenda. I need time." The weeks after that conversation were some of the hardest of my life. Anthony didn't come home, but at least I knew where he was, and that he was willing to talk eventually. I held on to that like a lifeline. I kept texting him, but I tried not to overwhelm him. A simple "thinking of you," here and there, or updates about things I was working on. Sometimes he replied with short, polite answers. Other times, he didn't respond at all. It was like walking a tightrope, and every step felt like it might send me falling. I threw myself into fixing the mess I'd made, not just with Anthony, but in every part of my life. I started budgeting for real, writing down every dollar I spent, and cutting out anything that wasn't essential. I sold a few things I didn't need, a couple of handbags, some shoes I'd only worn once, and used the money to pay off part of the credit card balance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I wanted to prove to Anthony, and maybe even to myself, that I could be better. One weekend, I finally tackled the apartment. I'd been avoiding it, letting the clutter pile up like a physical manifestation of all the chaos in my life. But now, I cleaned every inch of it, scrubbing the floors, organizing the closets, and even fixing a broken cabinet door that Anthony had been meaning to get to. When I was done, the place looked better than it had in years, but it still felt empty without him. Meanwhile, Lauren kept checking in on me. "How's it going with Anthony?" she'd ask. And I'd give her the same answer every time. Slow. She'd nod and remind me to be patient, but it was hard. Every day that passed without him felt like another step closer to losing him for good. Then one Friday night, about 2 months after he left, Anthony texted me. "Can we talk tomorrow?" My heart practically stopped. I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. "Of course, what time?" 11 a.m., at the park near the shop, he wrote. I barely slept that night. My mind kept racing, imagining every possible outcome of the conversation. Was he coming to tell me he wanted a divorce? Or was this a chance to finally make things right? By the time morning came, I felt like a bundle of nerves. But I forced myself to pull it together. I got dressed, put on a little makeup, and headed to the park, determined to face whatever was coming. Anthony was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench near the playground. He looked the same as always, jeans, a plain t-shirt, and work boots, but there was something different about his posture. He looked more guarded, like he was bracing himself. I walked over and sat down next to him, leaving a little space between us. "Thanks for meeting me," I said quietly. He nodded, staring straight ahead. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "About us, about everything." I felt my stomach tighten, but I didn't say anything. I wanted to let him talk. When I left, I was angry. I felt like I wasn't just walking away from you. I was walking away from someone who didn't believe in me, who didn't think I was good enough to be her husband. His voice cracked a little, and I could tell how hard this was for him to say. And that hurt more than I can even explain. Tears were already streaming down my face, but I stayed quiet, letting him get it all out. "But I also started thinking about the good things," he continued. "The way we used to laugh together, how we always had each other's backs, even when things were tough. And I realized, I don't want to throw that away. I don't want to give up on us." My breath caught in my throat. "You don't?" I whispered. He shook his head. "No, but things have to change, Brenda. I can't go back to the way things were. We both have to do better, for ourselves and for each other." "I want that too," I said, my voice trembling. "I've been working on it, Anthony. I've been budgeting, paying down the credit card, and trying to take responsibility for my part in all of this. I know I've got a long way to go, but I'm trying." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "That's all I want," he said, "for us to try." We sat there for a while, talking about everything. Our hopes, our fears, and the things we needed to work on. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't tied up with a neat little bow, but it was a start. When we finally left the park, I didn't know what the future held for us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might actually have one. Anthony moved back in a week later, and we agreed to go to counseling to work through our issues. It wasn't a quick fix, and we still had a lot of hard conversations ahead of us. But we were doing it together, and that was what mattered. For the first time, I felt like we were on the same team again. Looking back, I wish I could say I didn't need to hit rock bottom to appreciate what I had. But sometimes losing something, almost losing it, is the only way to see its true value. I still have moments where I catch myself slipping into old habits. But now I remind myself of what's at stake. Because at the end of the day, Anthony isn't just my husband, he's my partner. And I'm finally learning how to be his.